Now, talking about the stillbirths and when we differentiate it from the live births, there is another phenomena that is this phenomena of separate existence. Talking about a child, so it's basically established when the child is expelled from the mother, and he or she is completely expelled, and we are establishing the live birth in such a case. So the proof of separate existence is another phenomena that comes when you're working as a medical legal officer and you're distinguishing the live births from the stillbirths. It's again very important, and we'll be discussing how are you going to establish that the birth was of a live nature or the birth was of a still nature. The infanticide by omission to offer the proper care. It's basically a proper care has to be established by the medical legal officer, or if there are signs of neglect on part of the medical team that was conducting the delivery, it comes under the significance of the legal procedures that are usually carried out on the neglect phases of the doctors. So hydrostatic tests on the lungs, they're usually carried out, and just to attain that the birth was of a live nature, these hydrostatic tests are done on the lungs of the infant or on the neonate. Now, the inspection of the fully and the minimally respired lungs, it's again going to differentiate between the stillbirths and the live births. Infanticide by omission to offer the proper care. Now, rear and outside, it's basically outside the domain of the pathologist examination, just to carry out these investigations. The infant is older than a newborn. So deliberate starvation are the signs of they are the obvious signs of the proper care. So if the proper care is not given to an infant, he or she may die, and there are going to be signs of starvation in such a case. There can be signs of neglect in such a case. Just by giving an overview of the hygiene of the infant, proof of the lack of care. What is going to basically prove the lack of care? The matter of witnesses and the clinical opinion. So we can get the evidence from the surroundings, from the people in the surroundings. They can give you an evidence that whether there was proper care given to the infant or to the neonate or not. And then we can have a clinical opinion at the same level. Autopsy may reveal hypothermia, as the child is not covered properly in such cases, and the obstruction of the air passages is sometimes seen in such a case, and the mucus or amniotic fluid, it excessively builds up in the respiratory passages or the tracheal rings. The proof of separate existence is basically established and is a main proof of live birth in such a case. So food is found in the stomach, and it proves the separate existence because the first feed has been taken by the newborn, and so it basically proves that the separate existence has been established in such a case. Monitoring changes in the cord. So the cord changes and the placental changes are going to be there, and one has to look for the signs as well. Extraneous material in secondary bronchi. It indicates the stillbirths in such a case. Unequivocal demonstration of breathing is again another phenomena that happens, and that is going to prove the separate existence in such a case. How are we going to differentiate in such a case? It's basically going to be a hydrostatic test that is going to be performed on the lungs, just to maintain that the age of viability has been attained or not in such a case. Now, it is quite a controversial phenomena in such a case. The lungs float in water and the infants breathe in such a case. The stillborn lungs, they usually float, and that is one of the phenomena seen in the live births. Lungs from live-born infants, they usually sink, and lungs from the stillborn infants, they usually float. So that is basically the differentiating phenomena over here. Not done in every case, but when you are going to basically establish the live births from the stillbirths, this hydrostatic test is performed on the lungs. So if revival techniques they are carried out, they are going to negate this test, and the floating of the thoracic organs, they are going to establish the respiration has occurred. Now, the proof of respiration is to basically feel and listen to the lungs, and if it is a stillbirth, then the lungs are dark, small, heavy and liver-like, and may still float and contracted against the mediastinum. So these are basically the particular characteristics of the lungs that are going to be present in a stillbirth, because the first cry has not taken place in the stillbirth phenomena, and so the lungs are going to float in such a case. No free space in the pleural cavities is present in such a case, and the appearance varies with the time of respiration. So it's again another phenomena that is quite common. Feeble or brief respiration has occurred in such a case of stillbirth, and it affects only the margins. The robust or prolonged breathing is present, and the total expansion takes place after the death. Smaller than breathed ones. The unrespired lungs are smaller than the breathed ones, and the range of expansion is quite different from the stillbirths. The weight is also varied in when we compare it to the stillbirths. The texture is usually rubbery and uniform. So this is going to be the texture over here, and when we compare it with the stillbirths, the texture over there is quite contracted and it is not rubbery in consistency. Now, no pallor areas at the margins are quite commonly seen. There is a uniform color and texture when excised. No crepitations or rubbings are formed in such a case. Inspection of the respired lungs is again very common. Single good breath that basically unfolds some fetal pulmonary tissues, and ordinary handling of the dead that basically is going to give rise to the aspirate air into the lungs. That is again going to basically establish whether the lungs respired or not. And when we compare it with the stillbirths or the unrespired lungs, the air is not going to be present in the lungs, and the respired lungs are going to sink even though the air is going to be present in the lungs. So the respired lungs are quite obvious in their characteristics. The organs are pink or mottled. So this is the appearance. And how are we going to differentiate from the stillbirths, and in which some of the expansion is done, and then the unrespired lungs in which the intrauterine death took place. So there's going to be the medial edges, they basically overlap the mediastinum in such a case, and the edges of the lungs are more rounded in nature. So even the hilas, the general texture of the lungs, they're all going to be noted down by the pathologist or the autopsy worker, whosoever is carrying out the medico-legal process of the autopsy that is being carried out. The darker atelectasis under the pleura, that is also one of the signs of the respiratory lungs. And then the lung is quite spongy. So it's going to be a pink, spongy lung. The darker atelectasis are going to be present, and the aerated texture is going to be there if the sections are cut for the lung and they are sent to the chemical pathologist for the further assays. The minimally respired lungs, it shows its own size. The intermediate changes between the two extremes are quite evident over here. The anterior margins, they show partial expansion, and the lingula is more pinker and more expanded in such cases. The ear crepitance test, when it is carried out, it gives you a very sensitive criteria over here. So whenever we are going to establish the differences, whether the first cry has been there or not, and how are we going to distinguish between the stillbirths, the least expanded lungs, as well as the first cry, if it is established, how are we going to basically differentiate, and what are the different tests that are designed for such a differentiation? That is the end of this section. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.